Good evening, Shalom Aleichem, and welcome. My name is Rabbi Seth Grauer, and I am coming to you live from Toronto, Ontario. I'm a boger of Yeshivat Har Etzion. I learned in the yeshiva 1996-97 as well as 97-98, and I'll be honest, it's not that often that I give live streaming shiurim. So it's hard to know exactly who's out there, who's watching, who's listening. But it's my pleasure to share some words of Torah with you this evening. And Mirza Hashem, we'll learn a little bit as preparation for the holiday of Shavuot. So thank you again for joining. And a tremendous yesher koach to Yonatan Shai Friedman for organizing the shiurim tonight and all the learning that is going on. As well, a tremendous yesher koach to the entire yeshiva for trying to engage not only their bogrim, their alumni, but offering words of Torah from around the world, from Rabbanim, Mechanchim, and others who are able to join either live or perhaps through the recordings after the fact. So thank you again. So what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to spend some time talking to you about an interesting question that came up in a class that I was giving just this past week to a wonderful group of grade 12 young ladies at Ulpanat Orot, girls' high school here in Toronto. And I wanted to learn it and discuss it really through the guise, through the medium, through the mechanism of Birchot HaTorah, the sugya of learning Torah. And I thought, by way of introduction, that it was proper and appropriate to discuss this and spend some time focused on this, particularly as an introduction to the holiday of Shavuot. As everyone knows, Shavuot is coming just in a few days, and prior to spending the night learning, and prior to engage in Matan Torah, and prior to gaining and growing from the Shavuot Yantiv experience, one has to make a bracha. One has to say Birchot HaTorah. Person, we wake up every morning, we say Birchot HaTorah, and it's an unbelievable sugya with lots and lots of complicated questions. So let's dive into it. Let's get started, and hopefully we'll shortly get to the creative component that I hope will be a bit new for those of you who are listening. So the Gemara tells us in Brachos, Amar of Yehuda, Minayin lebirchat hamazon lachra min haTorah. Gemara asks, how do we know that there's a mitzvah of birchas hamazon to bench after one finishes eating? The Gemara quotes the pasuk Shneimar, Ve'achalta v'sevata u'beirachta. Then the Gemara goes along. The Gemara says, Minayin lebirchas haTorah lefaneha min haTorah. How do I know that there's a mitzvah midoraisa? It sounds like from the Gemara is asking on a doraisa level, a Torah level. How do I know that there's a mitzvah to say a bracha before one learns Torah? And the Gemara quotes the pasuk, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havu Godel Eloheinu. I will call out the name of Hashem, and I will ascribe greatness to our God. Pasuk from the Torah, giving us the source for both benching as well as Birchas HaTorah. So the Rambam, in his Mishnah Torah, quoting and referencing this Gemara in Hilchos Tefillah, Perek Zayin, Halacha Yud, the Rambam writes the following: Hamashkim likro baTorah, kodem sheyikra kriyat shema, bein kara b'Torah shebechtav, bein kara b'Torah shebal peh, notel yadav tchila, umevarach shalosh brachot v'achar kach koreh. The Rambam tells us a person should wake up in the morning before he says kriyat shema, before he davens, whether he's going to be involved and engaged in Torah shebechtav learning, or whether he's going to be involved and engaged in learning of Torah shebal peh. It doesn't matter. Either way, notel yadav tchila, wash his hands first, and afterwards he should say 3 brachos. What are they? Ve'elohein, the Rambam continues, Asher k'rishon mitzvot tzivanu al divrei Torah, harevna Hashem Elokeinu at divrei Torah tzavavinu v'yos amchabei Yisrael, v'nei anachnu v'tzetzeinu v'tzetzei amchabei yodei shemecha v'oskei Toratecha, Baruch atah Hashem noten Torah, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher barach rabbeinu mikol ha'amim, v'nasan lanu es Torah. So Baruch atah Hashem noten haTorah. And again, we're familiar with these brachot and with the language and the liturgy of these brachot. Not that our Sidurim have the exact same language, but our language is close enough. And as such, we recognize these brachot. What's interesting, though, is that despite the fact that the Rambam quotes this in the Mishnah Torah in the Ada Chazaka, and quotes it in the context of a mitzvah, we don't find in the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot, in the Minyan HaMitzvos, where the Rambam counts mitzvahs, he doesn't count the mitzvah of Birchot HaTorah. And he should. If you look at the Gemara in Brachos, the Gemara in Brachos would seem to be pretty explicit that there's a mitzvah to say Birchot HaTorah, and it's a question. As a result, why is it that the Rambam does not count the mitzvah of Birchot HaTorah if, in fact, the Rambam quotes it lahalacha as a mitzvah, and the Gemara seems to say explicitly that it is, in fact, a mitzvah d'oraisa, quoting a pasuk from the Torah. So, as I'm sure you know, and this is somewhat of a famous topic and a famous question, perhaps many of those of you who are watching and listening have learned this before. This is not a new question. It's not my question. Many of the Rishonim already asked this question on the Rambam, and many of the Achronim discussed it, and there are a number of answers given. And for the most part, the answers really split into two different camps. On the one hand, there's one group of Rishonim and Achronim who believe that, in fact, the Rambam felt it was not a mitzvah d'oraita, and in fact, the pasuk in the Gemara must be using Kishem Hashem Ekra not as a makor midoraita, but rather as an asmachta. It's a reliance of sort, not that different. Famous Gemara in Chulin, where the Gemara says Haman minat Torah minayin, or Esther minat Torah minayin. Quotes Psukim, Anochi Astir Panai, it quotes Mordechai, Minat Torah Minayin. And again, it quotes Psukim to reference these central figures within the story of Purim, and as if they have reference places and spots in the context of the Torah. But in fact, in reality, obviously, these are not sources, but instead they are simply connections and asmachta for this. And there are some who write that in fact is what the Rambam is doing here. The Rambam must have felt that the mitzvah of Talmud of Birchot HaTorah is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and the pasuk is an asmachta. Now, while that is a theoretical possibility, that's not necessarily accepted by all. And in fact, the Ramban right away in his commentary on the Sefer HaMitzvos in Shechachot Ha'asin, the Das Ramban in Mitzvah Tetvav, the Ramban writes, first of all, he says, "Shenitz davinu lahodos l'shmo yitbarach b'chol eit shenikra b'Torah al hatova hagedula she'asa lanu b'tito torato aleinu v'hodienu hamasim haritzuyim lefanav shebehem ninchal chai olam haba." And he says at the end, "Mechal zeh mitbayar shehabracha hazu min haTorah." The Ramban says explicitly that he disagrees with the Rambam. He thinks the Rambam is incorrect, and in fact, he believes that there is a mitzvah of Birchot HaTorah, and the mitzvah of Birchot HaTorah is mid'oraisa. Some of the commentaries, the later commentaries that try to or would normally defend the Rambam, the Sefer Megillat Esther, Sefer HaMitzvos of the Rambam, he writes, "V'nira li ki divrei haRamban sodkim bazeh hamakom v'lo yadati lama lo mana harav." He says, I don't understand why it is that the Rambam did not count this as a mitzvah. Im lo chishev shemidrasham bazeh pasuk hu al derech asmachta. Again, he quotes his idea. It must be that the Rambam felt it was an asmachta, but he says he doesn't understand. The Aruch HaShulchan, Birchos HaShachar, Siman Mem Vav Siv Bet, he tries to come a little bit to the defense of the Rambam, and he suggests that perhaps what the Rambam really was doing, what the Rambam meant, was not to say or not to suggest that it wasn't mitzvah d'oraisa, but perhaps it's included in another mitzvah. In fact, the Aruch HaShulchan writes, "V'gam haRambam sover shehi min haTorah elasvir leishezeu chelek mechalki hamitzvah delimud Torah u'mitzvah achat hi." He says it is part and parcel of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and instead of having a separate mitzvah d'oraisa to make a bracha, one simply includes this within the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah. Okay. So we have this machlok, this debate between the Rambam and the Ramban. But what I'd like to focus on is actually the language that the Ramban uses when disagreeing with the Rambam, because the Ramban uses a very interesting language. He says, "Shenitz davinu lehodot lishmo yitbarach b'chol eit shenikra b'Torah al hatova hagedula she'asa lanu." He says we're commanded to praise and thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to offer praise and thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the great goodness that He did for us by giving us this Torah that ultimately allows us to merit Olam Haba. Now, it would seem from the words of the Ramban, Nachmanides, that it sounds that Birchot HaTorah is actually a Birchot Shevach v'Hodah. Anytime that you look, or one looks at a bracha, or the matbeya, the language of a bracha, one has to recognize and one has to notice and think about what type of bracha it is. And typically speaking, many of you know that all brachos split into three categories. You have Birchat HaMitzvah, Birchat Shevach v'Hodah, and Birchat HaNa'ah. Birchat HaMitzvah are always said before a mitzvah, and they typically are a very, very short language of a bracha, and Birchat Shevach v'Hodah are generally much more expansive. And there are many, many different types of brachot that fit into this question of what category they belong to. In fact, right, one needs to look no further. There are lots of examples. A simple example that's often discussed: the bracha of Birchas Erusin, in particular, is one in which there's a famous debate between the Rambam and the Rosh, the Rabbeinu Asher. The Rambam writes that the bracha of Erusin, even though it's a longer bracha and it doesn't sound like a typical bracha as a mitzvah, is in fact a bracha as a mitzvah. The mitzvah is the mitzvah to get married, mitzvah of ki yikach, right? And the Rambam says that the bracha that the Masada Kedushin, the rabbi, makes is a bracha as a mitzvah. The Rosh, the Rabbeinu Asher, says it's not true. It's a bracha shevach v'hodah, and he points to the fact that yes, it's true. We say Asher Kedishanu in the language of the bracha, but it's a hechsher mitzvah towards the mitzvah of Purim. But when he says, in fact, the language of the bracha is much longer than a normal birchas mitzvah. And it's also a bracha on the negative. Sh'asar lanu zarusas, right? It's a bracha almost on a lotase, which we don't typically find in the context of a mitzvahs aseh and a bracha, a birchas mitzvah. So the Rosh there says it's a bircha shel vodah. And there are other examples that one could find where it's a question as to what type of bracha it is. For our purposes, this debate between the Ramban, who seems to say and seems to feel that it's a bircha shel vodah, and the Rambam, who, when again you look at the language of the bracha of the Rambam tells us, again, pretty clearly, Mashkim Likur B'Torah, Kodem Shikor Krishma, right? He says, Notel Yadav Tchila V'Achar Kach Mavarach Shalosh Brachot Elu. Sounds from the Rambam that it is. And in fact, the Rambam seems to say, from the language of the bracha, that it would seem to indicate, and many people assume that according to the Rambam, it is in fact a birchas mitzvah and not necessarily a birchas shevach v'hodah. Now, this question of whether or not it's a birchas mitzvah or birchas shevach v'hodah is not just a theoretical question, but it rather has some significant implications, and there are many, many nafkaminot. And time in this short shiur doesn't permit me to go through all of the nafkaminot and discuss them extensively, but just to give you a sense of what we mean by nafkaminot, I'll mention two or three. First of all, the most obvious nafkamina that's worth mentioning is the question as to whether or not a person has to learn immediately after saying the bracha. Typically speaking, with all mitzvot, person makes the bracha, says a birchas a mitzvah, and then has to jump into Talmud Torah, has to get involved in learning right away. And in fact, the Rambam, once again, discussing and talking about this question as to whether or not a person has to learn immediately, the Rambam writes in Perek Zayin, Halacha Aleph. Let me just find the Rambam. The Rambam writes, I don't have it in front of me, but the Rambam writes that there is an obligation to say Birchot HaTorah, and then one has to learn immediately begin and involve and engage himself in Talmud Torah. Not surprisingly, that's why when you look at our Birchot HaTorah, right after we finish saying the bracha, we say Psukim, Yivrech Hashem Yishbrecha, Yer Hashem Panav Elecha V'Yichunecha, Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'Simcha Shalom. We learn a Mishnah, Elu Dvarim. We learn a piece of Gemara as well to make sure that we involve ourselves in Torah Shebachtav and Torah Shebal Peh right after I say the brachos. But the Ri, quoted in Tosfos in Brachos and Daf Yud Aleph, disagrees. And in fact, the Ri says that one does not need to learn immediately. First, he quotes the Yerushalmi, where the Yerushalmi writes, Shekvar niftar ba'ava rabba, different piece of the Gemara and Brachos. The Gemara and Brachos tells us that if a person forgot to say Birchot HaTorah, he has the ability to exempt himself from Birchot HaTorah through the blessing, the Birchos Kriyat Shema, specifically of Ava Rabbah. The rewrites based on the Yerushalmi, first quoting the Yerushalmi, where the Yerushalmi says, Perish la'alter, shelimim miyad ba'oto makom, you have to learn immediately at that moment. The Re says it's not true. Lo kaima lan kosa Yerushalmi. He doesn't hold by that. Ve'ein sarich la'alter lilmod. Says you don't have to learn immediately. Now, what's the machloket? What's the debate between the Re and the Yerushalmi in the context of how he understands this? Again, the Rambam as well, in terms of what the Rambam writes, would seem to indicate the debate is over what type of bracha it is. And if it's a Birchas HaMitzvah, which makes sense, it would be appropriate for an individual to learn right away. You say the bracha, you have to continue with your learning immediately. But on the other hand, if it's a Birchas HaTorah, a person doesn't necessarily need to learn right away. And instead, one could make a bracha and learn later on. And it's not obligated. There's no obligation to necessarily be involved and engaged in learning immediately thereafter. One nafkamina. A second nafkamina I'll mention, just to understand what we mean by these practical differences, these nafkaminot. Does a person need to make a Birchas HaTorah specifically in a case where he's thinking about Torah? We know that there's a mitzvah to think about Torah all the time, and a person should always be involved and engaged in Talmud Torah. However, does that mean that a person has to make a Birchas HaTorah before he's thinking about and before he's engaged in thoughts related to Torah? It's a good question. To some extent, it may be dependent on exactly this question, because we find in Machloket, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Narchaim Sim Mem Zayin Sifdal Mahar B'Divrei Torah Ein Tzarich Levarach. Shulchan Aruch says the person who's thinking about Torah does not need to say a Birchas HaTorah. Having said that, the Magen Avraham disagrees, and the Magen Avraham says Mahar Dihir Lav Kedibur Dami in explaining it. But the Magen Avraham then goes on, and the Birchot HaGra says Tzarich Iyun Dekan Mevarach Al Mitzvah V'Chilek A Mitzvah B'Hir V'Alo Nemar V'Yikisa Bo Yom V'Layla. The Birchot HaGra writes, Vilna Gaon says, it doesn't make any sense. We know that there's a mitzvah to think about Torah. So if there's a mitzvah to think about Torah, shouldn't I have to make a bracha before I think about Torah? So it's very possible that this exact debate between the Gra and how we understand the Shulchan Aruch is, again, what type of bracha is it? Is it a Birchas Shevach or is it a Birchas HaMitzvah? Okay, so I think we have a sense of this machloket, this debate, and what exactly we mean by this. Now, we're going to end off with one final question that's really going to take us to the point that I wanted to get to, which I think is a little bit of a unique perspective, and hopefully will give us some insight as we prepare and get ready for the upcoming holiday of Shavuot and the Kabbalat HaTorah that hopefully will ensue. Tosos has a famous question where Tosos asks, why is it that when it comes to the mitzvah of sukkah, a person has to make a bracha on sitting in the sukkah every time I sit down to have a meal in a sukkah, even multiple times a day, but yet I could be yotzei Talmud Torah with one bracha at the beginning of the day, and that's it. I say one bracha, I learn a Mishnah, I learn a pasuk, I finish my limud Torah, I finish my learning, I move on, and I no longer have to make another bracha throughout the rest of the day. Again, if Talmud Torah is a mitzvah, and certainly according to the opinion who says that Birchas HaTorah is a Birchas HaMitzvah, shouldn't I have to be involved? Shouldn't I have to engage in saying specifically a new bracha every time that I learn Torah? Why is it and how is it that I can make one bracha and exempt myself for the entire day? So it's a good question, and I think that to some extent the answer is very much rooted in a question that a student asked me this week that really led to a beautiful discussion. This past week, we were teaching a class in Parsha, and we were discussing Parshat Bahar, and specifically the mitzvah of Shemitah. And one of my students asked me the following question. She said, why is it that the mitzvah of Shemitah is the first of the mitzvot Hatuliyat Ba'aret that is taught to the Jewish people upon their entry, or as they were getting ready to enter the land of Israel, right? As we know, the end of Sefer Vayikra, Parshas Bahar, B'chugos at the beginning of Bamidbar, this week's Parsha, in fact, the Jewish people are getting ready to enter Israel. We count the Jewish people, and at this point, Moshe Rabbeinu has no idea that things are going to go wrong. He has no clue of the problems that are going to begin in Parshas Bahaloscha, the mitonanim, and issues with water and meat, and all the troubles, the trials, the tribulations, the difficulties that can happen that are ultimately going to cause the Jewish people to travel around the desert for 40 years and not allow this generation to enter. So Moshe is getting ready, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is getting the Jewish people ready to enter Israel. And the first mitzvah that they teach before Truma, Meiser, Chala, Leket, Shechla, Peya, Neter, Ravai, any of these mitzvahs, before any of them come up, is the mitzvah Shemitah. And to some extent, it's really not that logical. Shemitah doesn't apply until year number 7. Prior to Shemitah, you're going to have lots of other mitzvahs, Hatuliyas Baris, that the Jewish people are going to have to be engaged in. Shouldn't Shemitah be the last mitzvah that is taught, not the first mitzvah? I thought it was a really good question, and we engaged in a discussion in which we came up with a number of answers. We discussed the fact that perhaps, and really we went in the direction of trying to think about why would it be that God would teach this first. And we pointed out the following, and I'd like you to think about it and consider the implications of this. When you look at the Torah and you look at what the Torah teaches and what the Torah says in particular, in the Pasuk, the Torah writes, Sheishanim tizrat tzadecha v'sheishanim tizmart kamecha v'asafta et t'vuatcha, right? Person should work for 6 years. 6 years you should toil. 6 years you should work the land, gather your crops. And then b'shana shvi'it, and the 7th year, only at that point should an individual go and rest. Shabbat l'Hashem. But first there are 6 years of work. So if you think about it, what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu doing? God is perhaps making sure that you set your goals, making sure you think ahead, making sure you plan ahead. All of that is true, but more than anything else, God is making sure, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making sure that from the moment that we set foot on the land, we start to work. The mitzvah is not just to rest, Shemitah, on the 7th year, but the mitzvah actually begins in the 1st year. Sheishanim tizrat tzadecha. Work the land for 6 years. So immediately upon entering Israel, the mitzvah of Shemitah applies. It's not true that you have to wait 7 years to get to the mitzvah of Shemitah because it begins immediate. As a result, hayotze mizeh, what comes from this is something quite fascinating. It's something I think extremely important. And that is that for every day of those 6 years that a person works the land, a person is fulfilling a mitzvah. A person is fulfilling the mitzvah of Shemitah. They're sheishanim tizrat tzadecha. They're working the land for 6 years so that eventually, b'shana shvi'it, they can rest. But there's no rest if one doesn't work. You can't take vacation until you've spent time working. You can't reap the benefits in life until one puts the time in to reach that point. So in reality, it's very logical as to why it is that that's the first mitzvah mentioned in the Torah, precisely and specifically because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us thinking about Shemitah from the moment we set foot in the land and from the first day we work. And in many ways, that's really what Shabbos is as well. Shabbos is the 7th day of the week, but we count up to Shabbos each day, sanctifying every day and trying to infuse every single day with a little bit of Kedusha. When I work the land and I think about the fact that I'm fulfilling a mitzvah by working the land, my work is itself a Torah obligation. And maybe that's really the answer to the question that we asked in Tosfot, specifically focused on Birchot HaTorah being a Birchot Shevach V'Hodah, a blessing of praise and thanks, and why it is that even if it's a Birchot Mitzvah, I can make it once and be done throughout the day. Because maybe what in effect I'm saying, and this is brought down in many of the Achronim as well and discussed by others, but it's a very powerful message, I think, as we get ready for Shavuos. Talmud Torah is not something that I sit down and I start learning and I'm done and I've fulfilled my mitzvah. And then I come back to it a few hours later. When I make a Birchot HaTorah, I'm making the bracha on my day, on the whole day, on everything I involve myself in, everything I engage myself in. I wake up in the morning, I start thinking, what time is Shacharis? When is Sosman Kriyat Shema? I have to have breakfast. I'm hungry. Can I make it? Bracha? Yes, no. What can I eat? What time is Mincha? Where am I going? I'm involved in business dealings. Am I acting ethically, properly, honestly? Am I koveya itim over the course of the day? I'm dealing with interpersonal relationships. I'm thinking of ben adam l'chavero, how I speak to people, how I act. Everything I do is about Torah, is an expression of Torah, is involvement in learning. I'm not necessarily opening up a sefer and involved in learning throughout my day, but that doesn't mean I'm not thinking about Torah. That doesn't mean I'm not osek, I'm not involved. I'm not involved in learning or involved in kiyume ha-mitzvot, fulfilling mitzvot, thinking about mitzvot. So the message is that in an ideal world, I should structure my day and I should live my life so that I only need one bracha of Birchot HaTorah at the beginning of the day. I thank and praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving me the Torah, fulfilling this mitzvah, and blessing, praising Hashem as an expression of Shevach and Bakasha for giving me a Torah to live by, so that throughout my day, I can live a day of purpose. I can live a day of meaning. I can live a day structured in morals and ethics, where I look to do the right thing and I look to act in a proper and appropriate way, because I know I'm fulfilling the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if I wake up and I do that, and I go throughout my day that way, then it's clear that I only need one bracha in the morning. The same way that I start off my day if I'm working in the land of Israel, and if I'm in that land and I start year number 1 and I'm thinking about Shemitah, and that's part of my mitzvah, I'm fulfilling my mitzvah of Torah in every single day as I simply go through life. And that's an ideal expression of what Talmud Torah really should impact my life. And that's lilmod amanat lalasot. I learn in order to keep, I learn in order to do. And as we enter the holiday of Shavuot, what a tremendous value to think about, and what a tremendous ideal to live up to, and a way in which we hope to live our lives. Yes, it's true, we're going to celebrate the Kabbalat HaTorah, receiving the Torah. That's going to happen in just a few days. But in many ways, we want to make sure that the message sticks with us beyond just Shavuos and for the entire year. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you all those of you who are listening. A tremendous yeshakayach, bracha v'hatzlacha to Yeshivat Har Etzion, a yeshiva that not only did I learn at for many years, but is very close to my heart. Rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva, who I have to this day very, very close relationships with, and it's really a tremendous zechut to be a part of this learning, and a tremendous merit for me. I'm honored that the yeshiva asked me to join in this limud Torah, and in that merit, the yeshiva and all those who are learning, and really all of Klal Yisrael, should have a wonderful yantiv of limud Torah. And I wish everyone a chag kasher v'sameach, a yantiv filled with learning, filled with tefillot, and filled with growth for all. Thank you very much.